Okay, so it turns out that I actually found a good place to break because documents 4 through 6 are about our middle president here, FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Okay, so let's see what we have to say about FDR. Okay, I'm going to reframe this just to make sure that I remember what we're going through. I remember, obviously, but I want to make sure you remember. Especially if you're waiting some time in between these, okay? So part 3, document-based question. During times of national crisis, United States presidents have made controversial decisions affecting civil liberties. 3 of these decisions were Abraham Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus, Franklin D. Roosevelt's executive order to relocate Japanese Americans, and George W. Bush's signing of the U.S. Patriot Act. Okay? So we need an argument for and an argument against the president's decision, and we need to know the historical circumstances. What was going on to cause the president to want to do what they did? Okay, so FDR, executive order to relocate Japanese Americans. That's what we're looking at right now with document 4. Okay, so we have 4A and 4B on this page, and the question, and it's looking for 2 answers to go with this. So we're actually going to do it a little bit differently, where we are going to read our question first. We're going to circle our sources, and then we're going to go through them while checking back with our question, okay, to make sure we remember what we're looking for. Okay, so to start, we're going to read the question first. Read the question first. Based on these documents, state 2 circumstances that led to President Roosevelt's decision to relocate Japanese Americans living on the west coast of the United States. 2 circumstances that led to his decision, and that's what we talked about in the beginning, the framing of it. Relocate Japanese Americans living on the west coast of the United States. So we're looking for 2 reasons why he would want to relocate people. Okay? Document 4A. Oh, what did I forget to do? Circle that source. Okay, source number 1 is going to be, right from Franklin D. Roosevelt. President FDR, address to Congress, December 8th, 1941. So this is right from FDR. Document 4B was by Richard Polenberg, War and Society, the United States, 1941 to 1945. Looks like it's a book. Okay, so this guy wrote a book about what was going on 1941 to 1945. Okay, so let's read our primary source here, FDR. Mr. Vice President and Mr. Speaker. Don't know why that just did that. I was just trying to get my highlighter. Mr. Vice President and Mr. Speaker and members of the Senate and House of Representatives. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Oh, what's going on at this time? World War II? The United States was at peace with that nation and, at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense. But always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. So FDR is talking to Congress. We were deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Okay. Is that one reason why he would choose to relocate Japanese Americans living on the West Coast? Well, I would say yes, but let's read our second document here, document 4B, and then see what else we can find out, okay? So this is a secondary source. Okay? The Army, however, justified evacuations on the ground of military necessity. Oh my goodness, this thing just keeps jumping around. I don't know why. Okay. According to DeWitt, which is General John L. DeWitt, Chief of the Army's Western Defense Command, report. The continued presence of a large, unassimilated, tightly knit racial group bound to an enemy nation by strong ties of race, culture, custom, and religion, along with a frontier vulnerable to attack, constituted a menace that had to be dealt with. Even the absence of any overt act of sabotage caused suspicion. What did it just say? Even the absence of an overt act of sabotage. So were the Japanese Americans doing anything? No. It was just they were already suspicious of them. For it is taken as proof that plans have been carefully worked out and an invisible deadline, in quotes, was drawing near. Yet while the threat of Japanese forays, which is attacks, against the West Coast was not in fact removed until after the Battle of Midway in June 1942, and while the supposition that all Japanese Americans were potential fifth columnists, they were potential spies, drew strength from a report on Pearl Harbor. What was going on? Pearl Harbor. That erroneously ascribed, meaning attributed, American losses to espionage. So what they were thinking was that the losses that we suffered at Pearl Harbor were due to spies that were already in the States. Okay? So there was a lot of suspicion against the Japanese Americans. The Army's decision to relocate all Japanese resulted as much from the clamor of pressure groups as from the appraisal of military risk. There is a tremendous volume of public opinion now developing against the Japanese of all classes. As a matter of fact, it's not being instigated or developed by people. As a matter of fact, it's not being instigated or developed by people who are not thinking, but by the best people of California. So, okay, let's reframe our question. Based on these documents, what are two circumstances that led to President Roosevelt's decision to relocate Japanese Americans living on the West Coast? Well, what was one circumstance that led to it? I would say that Pearl Harbor was definitely a circumstance that led to it, okay? So we could say something on here about how Japan attacked the U.S. There was actually a military base there, but they attacked the troops at Pearl Harbor. They attacked the base, okay? What other circumstances led to this decision? Let's see. Attacks against the West Coast, it's not removed. They were worried about the Japanese attacking the West Coast because it's a huge coastline, right? It would be very hard to protect. I think this is probably our best one right here. Let me do this in a different color so you can actually see it. Oh, no, you don't want it in that color. All Japanese Americans were potential spies, okay? So they were concerned, right? One circumstance was concern that all Japanese Americans were spies. Of course, this was ridiculous. A lot of these people had been born here, And there was a lot of suspicion, there was a lot of fear, okay? Especially after we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. Okay, so that is document 4A and B. Okay, two circumstances that led to President Roosevelt's decision to relocate Japanese Americans living on the West Coast. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. Oh, okay. So we have a blurb of text. Ooh, big blurb of text. And we have a political cartoon. Okay, so let's take a look. What are we going to do first? Read the question first. Always, 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 always. Okay? Based on these documents, what was one argument of the San Francisco News to support the removal of the Japanese from the West Coast, from the Japanese people? Okay? They weren't, I put Japanese Americans, now they weren't all naturalized citizens, and they actually weren't allowed to become naturalized citizens until well after this. They was like 52. But a lot of them were Japanese. I mean, they were all Japanese, but a lot of them were still considered Japanese. They weren't Japanese Americans. A lot of their children had been born here, so they were Japanese Americans. They were American citizens. A lot of the older people were not. Okay? Not that that matters, but just pointing it out for you. Okay? All right, so, all right, 5A. Their best way to show loyalty. Let's take a look at where this is coming from. All right, so it's talking about the San Francisco News. So both of our sources are coming from the San Francisco News. Here is an editorial from March 6, 1942. And here is a political cartoon from March 6, 1942. Oh, they're both from March 6, 1942. Okay, they go together. All right. And we're looking for one argument that the San Francisco News used to support the removal of the Japanese. Okay. Okay. So, document 5A, their best way to show loyalty. Japanese leaders in California who are counseling their people, both aliens and native-born, to cooperate with the Army in carrying out the evacuation plans are, in fact, offering the best possible way for all Japanese to demonstrate their loyalty to the United States. So if they follow orders, they're showing loyalty to the United States. They're not really giving them a choice. Many aliens and practically all of the native-born have been protesting their allegiance to the government. Although the removal to inland districts outside the military zones may inconvenience them somewhat. I'm just going to highlight that. Even work serious hardships upon some, they must certainly recognize the necessity of clearing the coastal combat areas of all possible fifth columnists and saboteurs. Remember, fifth columnists, that word they use means spies. We got that in the last one, right? Inasmuch as the presence of enemy agents cannot be detected readily when these areas are thronged by Japanese, the only course left is to remove all persons of that race for the duration of the war. So what they're saying is they can't detect, enemy agents can't be detected if the area is already full of Japanese people, so they need to remove all of those Japanese people. Real danger would exist for all Japanese if they remained in the combat area. The least act of sabotage might provoke angry reprisals and easily could balloon into bloody race riots. We must avoid any chance of that sort of thing. The most sensible, the most humane way to ensure against it is to move the Japanese out of harm's way and to make it as easy as possible for them to go and remain away until the war is over. This article feels very condescending to me, and I believe it's meant that way. It really feels like it is. I don't know, maybe it's just because it's from 1942. And I know that, like, you wouldn't expect to hear something written this way these days. But, all right, let's find We're only looking for one argument. One argument, the San Francisco News, to support the removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Let's take a look at the political cartoon. All packed up and ready to go. Okay, so they're driving. They've got, you can't really see very well, but on the side here, when you're looking at a cartoon, always pay attention to the words that are in there. Okay, always pay attention to what it's saying as much as what it's showing. Okay. So there's a flag. The flag's in the military zone, right? And there's a big truck, and there are some Japanese people back there. You can't see them very well in here, but they're belongings, right? And the truck is labeled California-born Japanese citizens, loyal to USA. And then it's showing there's a sign, and this is the military zone on this side. The truck is heading in that direction, right? It's going away from us. It's going this way, right? A big long road leading to who knows where. We found out afterwards. And out of harm's way. So they're really concerned. That's what they're making it sound like. They're very concerned that the Japanese are going to end up, I mean, even those law-abiding citizens are going to end up in race riots, and if they show any kind of resistance against being moved from their homes. So they're protecting them by moving them out of the military zone, which was the entire West Coast. Okay, so what is one argument of the San Francisco News to support the removal of Japanese from the West Coast? Well, I think this is probably the easiest right here. Or you could say they believed that they were moving them out of harm's way. You can write that, of course. There's a couple things in here that, you know, even though it's an inconvenience, it was keeping them from race riots. Okay, that's an easy one to put in there. Okay. They're protecting them, so they needed to move them out of harm's way, right? I'm going to highlight that for you in case you want to write that instead of what I'm writing. Okay. Enemy agents cannot be detected readily when these areas are thronged by Japanese, and the only course left is to remove all persons of that race for the duration of the war. One argument was that there was no way to detect Japanese spies if Japanese people occupied the area. Again, you can also write down that they thought they were protecting them from race riots and, you know, things like that. Yeah, not a very nice part of our history. Okay, so I put down there was, if you can't read my handwriting, there was no way to detect Japanese spies if Japanese people occupied the area. They're saying, we know that most of these people are good law-abiding citizens, but the best way for them to show loyalty is to just cooperate and leave their homes and their businesses behind. Okay. And then we're going to do document 6, and we'll be done with this one because this is the last one about FDR, and then we're going to move on to George W. Bush. So I will do that for the last video. It's nice to have it split up like this. You will not obviously be able to do that during the test. You have to do them all at the same time. All right, so let's see. Let's leave our pen. All right, so document 6, the United States Supreme Court Justice Frank Murphy disagreed with the majority decision in Korematsu versus the United States. His dissent focused on the reasons the forced evacuation of Japanese Americans was unconstitutional. So remember, when we looked at our framework for our essay, it wants the historical background. They've already given you that for FDR, right? And the evacuation of the Japanese Americans to internment camps. which I haven't seen used in here yet, but hopefully they will. I'm not sure. But they were called internment camps. So they've already given you historical background, why it happened. You can mention Pearl Harbor, etc. And it gave you a reason for the evacuation, and now they're giving you a reason against the evacuation. Okay? So again, your documents give you a lot of your answers. You don't really need to pull too much external information. If you know the external information, if you know stuff that they're not telling you, put it down in your essay. But otherwise, I mean, they give you a lot of information just in here, okay? All right, so document 6. Let's read our question. You're gonna get real sick of me typing RTQF if you're not already. State one reason Supreme Court Justice Frank Murphy believed the forced evacuation of Japanese Americans was unconstitutional. One reason. And it tells you this little thing right here, if you're wondering, that just means that it's worth 1 point. Each one of these questions is worth 1 point. The ones that have 2 questions, obviously, or the ones that have 2 spaces for answers, those are worth 2 points. Okay? Source, Justice Frank Murphy, dissenting opinion, Korematsu versus United States, December 18th, 1944. So this is a legal case brought before, looks like the Supreme Court. Yeah, Supreme Court. Okay, so let me get my highlighter. The main reasons relied upon for those responsible for the forced evacuation, therefore, do not provide a reasonable relation between the group characteristics of Japanese Americans and the dangers of invasion, sabotage, and espionage, being a spy. The reasons appear instead to be largely an accumulation of much of the misinformation, half-truths, and insinuations that for years have been directed against Japanese Americans by people with racial and economic prejudices. Oh, that sounds important. To be largely an accumulation of much of the misinformation, half-truths, insinuations that for years have been directed against Japanese Americans by people with racial and economic prejudices. The same people who have been among the foremost advocates of the evacuation. A military judgment based upon such racial and sociological considerations is not entitled to the great weight ordinarily given the judgments based upon strictly military considerations. Especially is this so when every charge relative to race, religion, culture, geographical location, and legal and economic status has been substantially discredited by independent studies made by experts in these matters. What he just said there was that there's these prejudices, and they're based on race, religion, culture, where people live, their legal status, their economic status, and all of these things have already been discredited by studies. They've made studies that have proven them absolutely wrong, but people still hold these prejudices, and that continues today. I dissent, therefore, from this legalization of racism. Racial discrimination in any form and in any degree is no justifiable part whatever in our democratic way of life. It is unattractive in any setting, but is utterly revolting among a free people who have embraced the principles set forth in the Constitution of the United States. All residents of this nation are kin in some way by blood or culture to a foreign land. Yet they are primarily and necessarily a part of the new and distinct civilization of the United States. They must accordingly be treated at all time as the heirs of the American experiment and as entitled to all rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution. Man, we could take another look at this today with everything going on in the United States. All right, let's reframe our question. No, I don't want to put that there. Oh, I moved my bar over here. And I bet I can't move it back. All right. State one reason Supreme Court Justice Frank Murphy believed the forced evacuation of Japanese Americans was unconstitutional. He gave you a bunch. Okay. Let me put it in my own words, or you can put it in your own words, or you can pick anything else in here to answer this question. If you don't like what I write down, that's absolutely fine. That is your prerogative. One reason Justice Murphy believed that the evacuation was racial, nope, don't want that, racial discrimination. I think that's fine. Justice Murphy's believed that the evacuation was racial discrimination, so therefore he dissented. He did not agree with it, did not think that it was protected under the Constitution. And I believe the next one goes into George W. Bush, so we are done with this one. All right, documents 4, 5, and 6 were all about FDR and the forced evacuation of Japanese Americans. Okay. And we're good for now. Thanks. Bye.